The wooden gavel hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Justice Adebayo Okonkwo's arm was raised high, his deep baritone voice beginning to pronounce the words that would seal a woman's fate forever in the Pact Abuja High Court. Chioma Okeke, having been found guilty of the murder of your husband. Chinedu Okeke, this court hereby sentences you to death by... Bang! The heavy courtroom doors exploded open with such force that the sound ricocheted off the marble walls like a gunshot. Every head in the courtroom whipped around simultaneously. A gaunt man in a tattered brown kaftan stumbled through the entrance, his wild afro and unkempt beard making him look like he'd emerged from the streets of Woods Market. Dust and grime clung to his clothes. His chest heaved as though he'd run all the way from Area 1. "Don't kill her. She's innocent," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Gasps rippled through the crowd like waves crashing on Lagos shores. The court registrar dropped his pen with a clatter. A woman in the gallery covered her mouth in shock. The gavel froze midair. Justice Okonkwo blinked in disbelief, slowly lowering his arm. The entire courtroom held its breath. The homeless man lifted a battered phone held together with rubber bands and duct tape, his hands trembling. "My lord, I have evidence," he gasped. "Video evidence that will prove she didn't kill her husband." Absolute silence. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. In the dock, Chioma Okeke stood frozen, her hands gripping the wooden rail. She was a striking woman in her mid-30s, but fear had drained all color from her beautiful face. She wore a simple black anchor dress with matching geli headwrap. Tears glistened in her eyes as she stared at the strange man who had just crashed into her death sentence. She was the CEO of one of Nigeria's largest pharmaceutical companies, a self-made billionaire who had built an empire from nothing. And yet, right now, she looked like a frightened child lost in the market. Justice Okonkwo leaned forward, his judicial robes rustling. "Who are you, and why should this court listen to you?" The man swallowed hard, his atoms apple-bobbing visibly. "My name is Tun, my lord, and I know what happened the morning Chinedu Okeke died. I was there. I saw everything. Hello, guys. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, share it with your friends, and most importantly, turn on the notification bell so you can get informed when I drop another amazing story. Drop your thoughts and reactions in the comments. If you witness a crime but knew speaking up could put your life in danger, would you still come forward to save an innocent person? Let's dive in. 6 months earlier, Abuja had awakened to a bright sky and the familiar symphony of city sounds. Honking danfos, calling street vendors, and the Muslim call to prayer echoing across the sprawling capital. But inside the luxurious Maitama mansion of Chioma and Chinedu Okeke, the morning air was thick with tension. Chioma stood in her modern Italian-designed kitchen. Holding a small paring knife she'd been using to peel oranges for her husband's breakfast. Fresh juice glistened on her slender fingers, but her eyes were red and swollen from a sleepless night. The previous evening's argument still hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. "You promised me honesty, Chinedu," she had said, her voice breaking. "After everything we built together, I deserve honesty." Chinedu Okeke, a successful real estate developer in his early 40s, ran his hand over his closely cropped hair, a gesture he always made when stressed. His tailored igbada hung perfectly on his tall frame, but his face showed the strain of their conflict. "And I've told you I'm fixing it, Chioma. The business situation is complicated, but I'm handling it." They had loved each other deeply once. Their love story of the kind that made people believe in destiny. Two ambitious young people from nothing, building an empire together against all odds. But lately, stress had eaten holes in their patience. Business pressures, corporate rivals who smiled to their faces while plotting their downfall, and the constant way to maintain their success had taken its toll. Chioma's pharmaceutical company, Medicare Nigeria, had grown explosively in just 8 years, making her one of the youngest female billionaires in West Africa. That kind of success attracted admiration, but also attracted enemies, jealous competitors who wanted nothing more than to see her fall. The argument that morning had risen and fallen like ocean tides, each wave of words more painful than the last. "We need to talk about the Kaduna deal," Chioma pressed. "People are asking questions I can't answer." Later, Chinedu said, his voice gentle but firm. Let's both breathe. We'll discuss it tonight when our heads are clearer. Chioma nodded reluctantly, still hurt, still holding the small paring knife. She gestured with it as she spoke, sharp, frightened movements born of frustration, not menace. She never moved closer to him, never threatened, but anyone watching from outside might have misunderstood the scene. I just need you to be straight with me, she said, her voice cracking. No more secrets. Chinedu lifted both hands in a placating gesture, trying to calm his wife. I promise. Tonight, we'll talk about everything tonight. Outside their high compound wall, life in Maitama continued obliviously. A pure water seller called out his wares. An Okada rider buzzed past. And in the skeleton of an uncompleted two-story building next door, a construction project abandoned when the developer ran out of funds, a man watched the world from the shadows. Tandadi Yemi was not always homeless. Once, he had worn suits to work, sat behind a desk in an air-conditioned office in Garki, and understood technology and surveillance systems better than most people in Abuja. He had been a cybersecurity specialist with a promising career, a wife he adored, and a daughter whose laughter could light up the darkest room. But life has a way of destroying everything without warning. When powerful people decide you're a threat, they don't just ruin you, they erase you completely. For the past 4 months, Tand had been sleeping in that abandoned building. It was close to the Okeke mansion, which meant it was close to the garbage bins of wealthy families. Food scraps that kept him alive, discarded clothes that kept him warm. The security guards who patrolled his estate generally left him alone, perhaps out of pity, perhaps because he made himself invisible. What Tun still possessed, despite losing everything else, was a quick mind, a careful eye, and the habits of his former profession. He noticed patterns. He observed details others missed. And he had managed to hold on to one precious possession, his old work phone, cracked and battered but still functional. On that fateful morning, as the sun climbed higher over Abuja, Tan felt something shift in the air. He had developed instincts during his months on the streets, a sixth sense for when something was wrong. 2 men slipped to the side gate of the Okeke compound. They moved with the casual confidence of people who belonged, but their eyes were too alert, too watchful. One wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. The other kept checking his phone, then his jacket pocket, then his phone again with nervous energy. They were not delivery men. They were not friends visiting for breakfast. They were something else entirely. Tun's stomach tightened with a familiar dread. He had seen men like this before, in another life, in another tragedy that had destroyed his family. His hand moved almost unconsciously to his pocket, pulling out his old Samsung phone. The screen was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, and the battery indicator showed a thin red line, but the camera still worked. It had to work. He pressed record. Inside the kitchen, Chinedu turned toward the back door, responding to a sound, the soft creak of hinges that shouldn't be opening. He took 1 step forward, confused. The 2 men burst in fast. Chinedu! Chioma screamed, her voice piercing the morning air. Without thinking, she moved, placing her body between her husband and the strangers, because love does strange things. It makes you move before your mind can process the danger. It makes you willing to die for someone else. Everything erupted into chaos. Shouting, the sharp scrape of chairs against Italian tile, the flash of steel as one man pulled a blade from his jacket through the window of the abandoned building. Tun kept filming, his hand shaking but his finger steady on the record button. He captured faces. He captured movements. He captured the terrible truth of what happened next. The man in the baseball cap moved with practiced efficiency. He was a professional. The knife flashed once, twice, finding its target with brutal precision. Chinedu Okeke tried to fight back. He was a strong man, successful and confident, but the blade moved faster. Too fast. No, please. Chioma's screams tore through the morning. The assassins grabbed her by the arms, slamming her against a refrigerator. In the violent struggle, the small paring knife she'd been holding clattered to the floor. One of the men, the one without the cap, snatched it up with gloved hands. He wiped it deliberately in the spreading pool of Chinedu's blood, then tossed it near where Chioma collapsed, sobbing over her husband's body. It was perfect staging. The wife, the argument witnesses might have overheard, the bloody knife in her hand, the dead husband, perfect except for one thing. Tunde Adeyemi had recorded everything. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone in the compound must have called them. The assassins exchanged a quick look, then ran the same way they'd entered, disappearing through the side gate like ghosts. Tunde kept filming until they were gone, then quickly stopped the recording and saved it with trembling fingers. He knew exactly what would happen next. The police would arrive. They would see Chioma crying over her husband's body, blood on her hands and clothes. They would see the knife. They would remember any reports of marital disputes. And they would make the obvious but completely wrong conclusion. Everyone knew how quickly a story could turn against a woman in Nigeria, especially a successful, powerful woman whom many people already envied and resented. So Tunde did what he could do. He saved a video on his old phone, encrypted it the way he'd learned in his former life, and hid. He would need to disappear even more completely now, because if those men discovered a witness existed, they would come for him next. As police vehicles screamed into the compound and officers swarmed the house, Tunde climbed down from his vantage point and melted into the chaos of Abuja's streets. Just another invisible homeless man among millions. But he kept the phone close to his chest, under his tattered kaftan, because somewhere in that device was the truth. And Tunde had learned the hard way that truth was the most dangerous weapon in Nigeria. The only question was whether he would live long enough to use it. How could anyone survive seeing something like this and stay silent? Would you have risked everything to save a stranger? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to get even more intense. The arrest happened within hours. By evening, every news station in Nigeria was broadcasting the same sensational story. Pharmaceutical billionaire Chioma Okeke arrested for her husband's murder. The headlines wrote themselves with cruel efficiency. Love turns to murder in Maitama Mansion. Female CEO kills husband in domestic dispute. From boardroom to prison, the fall of Chioma Okeke. Social media exploded with judgment. People who had never met Chioma, who knew nothing about her character or her marriage, became instant experts on her guilt. The comments sections filled with vitriol. These career women think they can do anything. Money and power corrupt even women. She probably thought she could get away with it because she's rich. At the Abuja Police Headquarters in Area 1, Chioma sat in a cold interrogation room, still wearing her blood-stained Ankara dress. Her expensive gele had been removed, her natural hair now visible and disheveled. Mascara streaked her cheeks from hours of crying. Detective Ibrahim Musa, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a permanently skeptical expression, sat across from her with a tape recorder running. "Mrs. Okeke, let's go through this again," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "You were alone in the kitchen with your husband. You were holding a knife. Neighbors heard you arguing. And now your husband is dead, stabbed multiple times with that same knife. What am I supposed to think?" "I didn't kill him." Chioma's voice broke. "There were two men. They broke in. They stabbed Chinedu. I tried to stop them." Detective Musa exchanged a knowing look with his colleague. "Two men. That conveniently no one else saw. That left no trace except your fingerprints on the murder weapon. Because it was my knife in the kitchen. I was using it to peel oranges. Or using it to murder your husband." The interrogation continued for 6 brutal hours. Every answer Chioma gave was twisted, every explanation dismissed. The police had their narrative, and it was simple, clean, and believable. Jealous wife kills successful husband during domestic argument. What they didn't have was any evidence of these mysterious two men Chioma kept insisting had committed the murder. Meanwhile, across the city in the shadows, it was market. Tunde Adeyemi watched the news on a small television in a local bukka where he sometimes begged for food scraps. His heart sank as he saw Chioma's face plastered across the screen, her eyes hollow with shock and grief. He knew the truth. He had recorded the truth. But he also knew the danger of coming forward. Tunde was not naive about how power worked in Nigeria. He had learned that lesson 5 years ago when his own life had been destroyed. Back then, he had been Samuel Adeyemi, a different name, a different life. He'd been a senior cybersecurity analyst for a major tech firm in Abuja, married to his childhood sweetheart Ngozi, with a bright 6-year-old daughter named Amara, who loved to draw pictures of butterflies. His company had been hired to audit the digital infrastructure of several major corporations, including some owned by one of Nigeria's most powerful businessmen, a man named Chief Emeka Okonkwo, who had built his fortune through means that didn't always bear close scrutiny. Samuel and his team had discovered something during that audit. Massive fraud, money laundering, connections to politicians that violated numerous laws. Samuel had done what he thought was right. He'd reported it to the authorities, provided evidence, testified to investigators. And for his honesty, his world had burned. 3 weeks after his testimony, Samuel came home from work to find his house engulfed in flames. Neighbors said it had started in the kitchen, a gas leak probably, but Samuel knew better. His wife and daughter had been inside. By the time firefighters controlled the blaze, there was nothing left but ash and the ruins of everything he loved. The official investigation ruled it an accident. Case closed. But Samuel had received a message days before the fire, a simple text from an unknown number. Some truths are better left buried. He knew who was responsible. Everyone knew, but knowledge without proof is worthless, and proof against the truly powerful is suicidal. Samuel Adeyemi had died in that fire too, in a way. The broken man who emerged had taken to the streets, adopted the name Tund, and learned to survive in the spaces between society's cracks. He had stayed silent for 5 years, paralyzed by trauma and fear. But watching Chioma Okeke's face on that television screen, seeing another innocent person about to be destroyed by powerful people, something shifted inside him. Not again, he whispered to himself in the book, I won't stay silent again. But first, he needed to survive long enough to help her. The trial moved with frightening speed. In Nigeria, high-profile cases involving wealthy defendants often face intense pressure to reach quick resolution. The prosecution, led by an ambitious lawyer named Barrister Colonel Adebayo, who saw this case as his ticket to fame, built what seemed like an insurmountable case against Chioma. They presented the bloody knife with her fingerprints, testimony from neighbors who'd heard raised voices that morning, financial records suggesting marital stress, character witnesses painting her as cold and ruthlessly ambitious, expert testimony about the pattern of wounds consistent with a domestic killing. Chioma's defense lawyer, a competent but overwhelmed attorney named Mrs. Folake Adelik, fought valiantly but had little to work with. Her client's story about mysterious assassins sounded like desperate fiction. There were no witnesses, no security footage. The cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned that morning. No physical evidence of anyone else being present. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating in its simplicity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a complicated case. A wealthy, powerful woman grew tired of her husband. Perhaps he knew secrets about her business dealings. Perhaps she wanted to inherit his real estate empire. Perhaps she simply wanted him gone. She killed him in their kitchen with a knife. And when the police arrived, she concocted a story about phantom killers that no evidence supports. Don't let her wealth or status blind you to the obvious truth. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Chioma had collapsed in the dock, her anguished screams filling the courtroom. Her 8-year-old daughter, Amara. Yes, she had a daughter, just like Tund had once had, was removed from the courtroom by social services, crying for her mother. The media celebrated the verdict as justice served. No one is above the law, the headline proclaimed. Now, 6 weeks later, Chioma sat in her cell at Suleja prison, awaiting her sentencing. The death penalty was mandatory for murder convictions in Nigeria, and Justice Okonkwo was known as a stern judge who believed in the harshest punishments. She had 1 day left, 1 day before the system executed her for a crime she didn't commit. And somewhere in the streets of Abuja, a homeless man with a cracked phone was making the most important decision of his life. Coming forward meant exposing himself. It meant the people who had killed his family would know he was still alive, still dangerous. It meant painting a target on his back. But staying silent meant letting another innocent person die. Tun spent that last night before sentencing sitting in his abandoned building, staring at his phone. On its scratched screen, paused at the crucial moment, were the faces of Chioma's killers. He thought about Ngozi and little Amara, his wife and daughter who had died because he tried to do the right thing once before. He thought about Chioma's daughter, also named Amara by cruel coincidence, who would grow up motherless if he did nothing. "I'm sorry, Ngozi," he whispered to the darkness, "but I can't let it happen again." As dawn broke over Abuja on the day of sentencing, Tunde Adeyemi made his way to the High Court. He had no plan, no strategy beyond his simple phone and the truth it contained. Security tried to stop him at the entrance. No homeless people allowed in court. But Tunde had learned patience during his years on the street. He waited, watched, and when the crowd surged forward at the appointed hour, journalists, spectators, lawyers all crushing toward the courtroom, he slipped through in the chaos. He positioned himself near the exit doors, his heart hammering against his ribs. And when Justice Okonkwo raised that gavel to seal Chioma Okeke's fate, Tunde Adeyemi found his voice. "Don't kill her. She's innocent." Now, standing in the suddenly silent courtroom with every eye upon him, Tunde realized there was no going back. This was the moment. Truth or death. Perhaps both. Can you imagine having evidence that could save someone's life, but knowing it might cost you yours? What would you do? Comment below and let me know. And make sure you're subscribed because the next chapter reveals a shocking truth that was caught on camera. The courtroom remained frozen in that impossible moment. Justice Okonkwo, with his gavel still raised, Chioma Okeke gripping the dock rail with white knuckles, and Tunde Adeyemi standing in the aisle, his battered phone held high like a torch in the darkness. Two court bailiffs immediately moved toward him, their faces stern with the intention to remove this disruption. But Justice Okonkwo raised his free hand, stopping them mid-stride. The judge was a man in his early 60s, with the kind of face that had seen every possible lie, every desperate plea, every theatrical performance. He presided over murder trials for 30 years, and his bullshit detector was finely tuned. But something in this homeless man's eyes gave him pause. It wasn't desperation or attention-seeking. It was a particular kind of haunted certainty that comes from witnessing terrible truth. "Who are you?" Justice Okonkwo repeated, his voice measured and deliberate. "And why should this court grant you even one more second before removing you forcibly?" Tun's throat was dry as desert sand. He could feel the eyes of 200 people boring into him. Journalists who'd been covering this trial for weeks, Chioma's family and friends, the prosecution team looking furious at this interruption, and Chioma herself staring at him with an expression caught between hope and disbelief. "My name is Tunde Adeyemi, my lord," he said, his voice steadier than he'd expected. "And I should speak because on the morning of March 15th, I was inside the uncompleted building next to the Okeke mansion in Maitama." A ripple of whispers moved through the gallery. "I had been sleeping there for months," Tunde continued. "I'm homeless, as you can see. But I'm not stupid, and I'm not lying." He held up his phone again. "On that morning, I witnessed two men break into the Okeke compound. I watched them murder Chinedu Okeke. I recorded the entire thing on this phone. And I can prove that Mrs. Okeke is completely innocent." The courtroom exploded. Journalists shouted questions. Spectators gasped and murmured. The prosecution team erupted in objections. Chioma's defense lawyer, Mrs. Adelik, looked like someone had just told her she'd won the lottery. "Order." Justice Okonkwo's gavel finally descended. "Crack. I will have order in this court." Barrister Colonel Adebayo, the prosecutor, shot to his feet. "My lord, this is clearly a desperate ploy. A homeless man with a conveniently timed story and supposed evidence appearing on the day of sentencing? It's transparently a scheme, probably paid for by the defense." "I wasn't paid by anyone," Tunde shot back, anger flashing in his eyes. "I was afraid. I've been afraid for 6 weeks while I watched an innocent woman be convicted for something she didn't do." Justice Okonkwo studied Tunde for a long moment. The judge had a reputation for being tough but scrupulously fair. He'd sent many guilty people to prison, but he'd also overturned convictions when new evidence warranted it. "Approach the bench," he ordered. Tund walked forward on unsteady legs, very aware of how he must look. Dirty kaftan, wild beard, broken shoes held together with wire. But he held his head up. The bailiff reached the phone, but Justice Okonkwo held up a hand. Not yet. First, I have questions. He leaned forward, his voice dropping so only Tund, the lawyers, and court officials could hear. If you truly had evidence of this woman's innocence, why did you wait until today? Why not come forward immediately? Tund met the judge's eyes directly. Because I was a coward, my lord. 5 years ago, I reported powerful people for crimes I discovered in my work as a cybersecurity analyst. In response, they burned down my house with my wife and daughter inside. His voice cracked but didn't break. The official investigation called it an accident, but I knew. I've been hiding ever since, afraid that speaking the truth would just get me killed too. The courtroom had gone silent enough to hear a pin drop. Even the prosecutor looked momentarily speechless. But I watched this trial. Tund continued. I watched Mrs. Okeke be convicted. I saw her daughter crying in the courtroom before they removed her. And I realized... He swallowed hard. I realized that my wife and daughter didn't die, so I could spend the rest of my life being too afraid to do what's right. They died because powerful people thought they could silence the truth with violence. If I let that happen again, if I let Mrs. Okeke die to protect myself, then I'm just as guilty as the people who killed my family. Justice Okonkwo's expression was unreadable. He looked at the phone in Tund's trembling hands. And you claim to have video evidence of the actual murder? Yes, my lord. I recorded it from the window of the building where I was staying. The angle isn't perfect, but you can see faces. You can see what really happened. The judge sat back in his chair, the leather creaking. This was unprecedented. Trials didn't just stop at sentencing for homeless men with phones. But Justice Okonkwo hadn't built his reputation on following the easy path. He made a decision that will be debated in Nigerian legal circles for years to come. This court will examine the evidence. The prosecution nearly had a collective stroke. My lord, this is highly irregular. We would need time to authenticate any supposed evidence, to verify its source, to... Noted, Barrister Adebayo. Justice Okonkwo cut him off. But a woman's life hangs in the balance. If there is even a possibility that new evidence exists, this court has a moral and legal obligation to review it before proceeding with an irreversible sentence. He gestured to the court's IT specialist. Mr. Obi, please connect this device to our display system. A nervous young man in wire-rimmed glasses hurried forward. Tund handed over his phone, like he was giving away a piece of his soul. It was his last protection, his only proof, his final card. Mr. Obi handled it carefully, pulling out a cable from the court's AV system. The phone was so old and damaged it took several minutes to find a compatible connection. The entire courtroom watched in tense silence as the IT specialist worked. The file is heavily encrypted, my lord, Mr. Obi finally reported. But I can access it if... 642789, Tund said quietly. The password. The last 6 digits of his late wife's phone number. The large screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life. The first frame was shaky, a view through a window, jagged concrete beams, and the bright green of a mango tree in the corner. The time stamp in the corner read 7:23 a.m., March 15th. The angle shifted slightly. Now they could see the back entrance to the Okeke mansion, the well-maintained compound, the kitchen window. Play it, Justice Okonkwo ordered. What happened next will be replayed on every news station in Nigeria for weeks to come. The video showed 2 men, their faces partially visible, slipping through the side gate. They moved with the confidence of professionals. The man in the baseball cap looked up briefly, and for a split second, his full face was visible to the camera. Someone in the gallery gasped. I know him. The men approached the door. They forced it open and disappeared inside. The phone's microphone picked up muffled sounds, shouting, a scream, the terrible sounds of violence. Then the men emerged, moving quickly. This time, both faces were clearly visible as they ran back toward the gate. The video showed them escaping, and then moments later, police sirens began wailing in the distance. Justice Okonkwo ordered the video paused at the clearest frame of the first assassin's face. The courtroom erupted in recognition. "That's Jerry Obi," someone shouted. "He's Chief Emeka Okonkwo's personal security." No relation to the judge, but the connection was immediately clear. Chief Emeka Okonkwo, one of Nigeria's wealthiest businessmen, with connections to half the politicians in Abuja, and Chioma Okeke's biggest business rival. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Chioma's pharmaceutical company had been rapidly expanding, winning contracts that Chief Emeka had expected to secure. She'd undercut his prices, outmaneuvered his political connections, and generally proven to be a formidable competitor. In Nigeria's cutthroat business world, that kind of rivalry could be fatal. Justice Okonkwo looked at the frozen image on the screen, then at Chioma, who was now sobbing with a mixture of vindication and grief. "This court," he said slowly, each word heavy with implication, "is in recess. Mrs. Okeke's sentencing is hereby suspended pending a full investigation into this new evidence. Mr. Adeyemi, you will remain in protective custody. Bailiffs, I want these two men," he gestured at the frozen faces on the screen, "found immediately." He struck his gavel once. "Crack! This trial is far from over. Oh my God! Did you see that? The homeless man actually had proof. But who is Chief Emeka Okonkwo, and how far would he go to cover up his crimes? You have to see what happens next. Hit that like button and subscribe because this story just took a shocking turn. Within 24 hours of Tun's dramatic courtroom intervention, all of Nigeria was talking about nothing else. The video had been seized as evidence, but phone recordings of the courtroom proceedings had already gone viral on social media. "Homeless hero saved billionaire from death row" screamed the headlines. "Chief Emeka Okonkwo under investigation for murder plot." The trial that shook Nigeria, how one phone changed everything. But while the media celebrated Tun and speculated about Chief Emeka's involvement, the real battle was just beginning. In a secure witness protection facility in Gwarimpa, Tun sat in a small but clean room, the first real bed he'd slept in for years. Detective Sergeant Grace Okoro, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s from the intelligence response team, sat across from him, recording his formal statement. "Let's go through your background again, Mr. Adeyemi," she said, her voice kind but professional. "You said you were once a cybersecurity analyst?" Tun nodded, grateful to finally tell his full story. "Samuel Tun Adeyemi. I worked for DG Secure Solutions in Garki until 5 years ago. We were contracted to audit systems for several major corporations, including Chief Emeka's companies. Yes, that's when we discovered the fraud. Money laundering, falsified contracts, bribery documentation hidden in encrypted files. I reported it to the EFCC, testified in preliminary investigations." Detective Okoro's expression darkened. "And then your house burned down. 3 weeks later. My wife Ngozi and my daughter Mara died in that fire." Tun's voice remained steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "The investigation ruled it accidental. Gas leak, but I received threats. Messages telling me to recant my testimony, to disappear. Why didn't you go to the police?" Tun gave her a look that spoke volumes about his trust in institutions. "Detective, with all respect, Chief Emeka has connections everywhere. Half the politicians in Abuja owe him favors. I was a nobody from Nazarawa State with a computer science degree. Who would have protected me?" Detective Okoro couldn't argue with that harsh reality. "But you kept the phone." "It was my work phone. It has other files, too. Evidence I've been afraid to use." He met her eyes. "Maybe it's time I stopped being afraid." Meanwhile, across town in a luxurious office in Asakoro, Chief Emeka Okonkwo was having a very different conversation. At 63, Chief Emeka was a commanding presence, tall, barrel-chested, with iron-gray hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore traditional attire that cost more than most Nigerians earned in a year, and his office was filled with photographs of him standing beside presidents, governors, and senators. Right now, those photographs felt like they were mocking him. "You told me this was handled," he growled into his phone, his Igbo accent thickening with anger. You assure me the woman will be convicted, sentenced, and executed before anyone asked difficult questions. On the other end, his lawyer, a slick operative named Barrister Chidi Nwosu, sounded panicked. Chief, we had no way of knowing someone recorded the hit. Jerry and Amici were supposed to be professionals who are now identified on national television. Chief Emeka slammed his hand on his imported mahogany desk. Find them, clean this up, and find out everything about this homeless man who thinks he can destroy me. Chief, it may be too late for her. I don't pay you to tell me what's too late. Chief Emeka's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I pay you to make problems disappear. Make them disappear. He hung up and stared out at the Abuja skyline. He had built his empire through a combination of brilliant business instinct and ruthless elimination of obstacles. Chioma Okeke had been an obstacle, her pharmaceutical company undercutting his prices, stealing his government contracts, making him look weak. The plan had been elegant. Eliminate her husband to destabilize her, frame her for the murder, and watch her company collapse without leadership. By the time she was executed, he would have absorbed all her contracts and assets at bargain prices. But now, everything was unraveling. The manhunt for Jerry Obi and Amici Okoro was swift and brutal. By the next morning, police had tracked them to a hideout in Gwagwalada, where they'd been hiding since the video went public. The arrest was dramatic, broadcast live on national television. Jerry, the man with the baseball cap from the video, initially tried to maintain his innocence. But when confronted with the footage, when told that his accomplice Amici was already in custody and making a deal, his resolve crumbled. I want immunity, Jerry said to the investigating officers. Full immunity, witness protection, and I'll tell you everything. The authorities agreed. They needed to know who had ordered the hit. In the interrogation room, with cameras rolling for the court record, Jerry Obi confessed everything. Chief Emeka Okonkwo paid us 2 million naira each to kill Chinedu Okeke and frame his wife. He said Chioma's company was destroying his business. He wanted her dead or in prison, and he wanted her pharmaceutical empire to collapse. He provided details, dates of meetings, phone records, bank transfers into offshore accounts, even text messages from Chief Emeka's personal phone. The case against Chief Emeka was now ironclad. 3 days later, in the same courtroom where Tund had made his dramatic intervention, a very different scene unfolded. Chief Emeka Okonkwo sat in the accused dock, wearing a simple white agbada instead of his usual expensive attire. His lawyer, Barrister Nwosu, looked like a man who knew he was about to lose spectacularly. Chioma Okeke sat in the gallery, finally free after 6 weeks of wrongful imprisonment. Her daughter Amara sat beside her, holding her mother's hand tightly. The child's eyes were red from crying. Tears of relief this time, not grief. Justice Okonkwo, no relation to the accused, as he'd repeatedly clarified, presided with the same stern gravity he'd shown throughout. Chief Emeka Okonkwo, the judge intoned, you stand accused of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and perjury. How do you plead? For a long moment, Chief Emeka said nothing. His jaw worked, his eyes burned with fury, but even he could see the walls closing in. Not guilty, he finally spat. But the evidence was overwhelming. Jerry and Amici's confessions, corroborated by phone records and financial transfers. Tund's video, authenticated by multiple forensic experts. Testimony from business associates about Chief Emeka's threats against Chioma's company. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but the outcome was never in doubt. Barrister Colonel Adebayo, the same prosecutor who had so confidently convicted Chioma, now turned his formidable skills against Chief Emeka. His closing argument was devastating. Chief Emeka Okonkwo believed he was above the law. He believed his wealth, his connections, his power made him untouchable. He ordered the murder of an innocent man. He framed that man's widow, and he nearly succeeded in having her executed by the state for a crime she didn't commit. If not for the courage of one homeless man, a man who had already lost everything to this defendant's previous crimes, Chioma Okeke would be dead, and this murder will be absorbing her company's assets as we speak. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Chief Emeka's face turned purple with rage. This is a travesty. I have connections. I know governors, senators, the president himself. You cannot. Crack. Justice Okonkwo's gavel silenced him. Your connections, the judge said coldly, mean nothing in this courtroom. You will be sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. And I sincerely hope that the other powerful men you claim as connections learn from your fate. In Nigeria, we are working toward a justice system where even the mighty can fall. As bailiffs led Chief Emeka away in handcuffs, screaming threats and curses, Chioma Okeke finally allowed herself to weep. But these were different tears. Tears of vindication, relief, and grief for the husband she'd lost and nearly died for. Tun watched from the back of the courtroom, keeping himself inconspicuous as always. He'd given his testimony, handed over his evidence, and played his part. Now he just wanted to disappear again. But Chioma had other plans. Justice has been served. But what happens to the homeless hero who risked everything? The final chapter will leave you in tears. Don't you dare miss it. Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. A week after Chief Emeka's conviction, Tun stood outside the gates of Suleja prison waiting. The sun was setting over Abuja, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded him of better days, of sunsets watched with Ngozi while Lil Amara played in their compound. The prison gates opened and Chioma Okeke emerged, officially exonerated, officially free. She looked different from the terrified woman who'd stood in the dock facing death. She wore a simple but elegant Ankara dress, her natural hair styled in braids. Her daughter Amara, the other Amara, the one who still lived, ran to her mother, and they embraced for long minutes, both crying. Cameras flashed. Journalists shouted questions. But Chioma ignored them all, searching the small crowd until her eyes found Tun. She walked directly to him, her daughter's hand in hers. "Mr. Adeyemi," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Tun, I owe you my life." Tun shifted uncomfortably and used to being the center of attention. "You don't owe me anything, Ma. I did what anyone should have done." "But you're not anyone," Chioma insisted. "You're the only one who did what was right when it could have cost you everything." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've learned about what happened to you, to your family, what Chief Emeka did to you 5 years ago." Tun's face tightened with old pain. "That's in the past." "No," Chioma said firmly. "It's in the present. Because that man took everything from you, just like he tried to take everything from me. And while I can't bring back what you lost, I can and will help you rebuild." Before Tun could protest, she continued, "I've spoken with my lawyers. We're reopening the investigation into your wife and daughter's deaths. With Chief Emeka now convicted, witnesses will be more willing to come forward. We're going to prove what really happened to your family." Tun's breath caught. After 5 years of living with the truth but no justice, the possibility of vindication felt overwhelming. "But more than that," Chioma said, "you're not going back to the streets. From today, you're part of my family." "Ma, I can't accept." "You saved my life, Tun," she interrupted. "You saved my daughter from growing up without her mother. You don't get to refuse." There was steel beneath her gentle tone, the voice of a woman who had built a business empire and wasn't used to taking no for an answer. That night, Tun found himself in Chioma's Maitama mansion, the same house where he'd witnessed a murder from his hiding place. But now he entered the front door, not as a homeless observer, but as an honored guest. A room had been prepared for him, clean clothes laid out, a bathroom with hot water, luxuries he'd forgotten existed. As Tun stood under the shower, letting water wash away months of street crime, he finally allowed himself to cry. Great, shuddering sobs that he'd been holding back for 5 years. Grief for his lost family, relief that he'd survived, pride that he'd finally done something right. When he emerged, clean-shaven and wearing new clothes, he barely recognized himself in the mirror. Over dinner, a proper meal at a proper table, Chioma laid out her plans. "I'm establishing a foundation in your name," she announced. "The Tun Adeyemi Justice Fund. It will help people who've been failed by the system, wrongly accused, unable to afford proper legal representation, victims of powerful people who think they're above the law. You don't have to do that, Tun protested weakly. I'm not doing it for you, Chioma said with a slight smile. I'm doing it because there are thousands of people like us, people who need someone to stand up for them the way you stood up for me. Young Amara, who had been quietly eating her rice and stew, suddenly spoke up. Mr. Tund, my mommy says you used to work with computers. That's right, Tun said gently, reminded painfully of his own daughter who would have been about this age now. Can you teach me? I want to learn how to make websites and stuff. Chioma's eyes glistened. Actually, that's the other thing I want to discuss. My company needs someone to head our cybersecurity division. Someone I can trust completely. Someone who understands what it means to stand for what's right even when it's dangerous. Tun stared at her. You want to hire me? I want to hire you, house you, and help you rebuild your life. But more than that, she paused, emotion making her voice thick. I want to give you what Chief Emeka took away. A purpose, a family, a future. You saved my life, Tund. Let me help save yours. The months that followed were transformative. The investigation into the fire that killed Tund's family was reopened. With Chief Emeka in prison and witnesses no longer afraid to speak, the truth came out. The fire had been deliberately set by Chief Emeka's men as retaliation for Tund's testimony about financial fraud. 3 men were arrested and convicted. Chief Emeka received additional charges. It didn't bring Ngozi and Amara back, but it gave Tund something he'd lost. Validation that he hadn't been crazy, that his family's deaths weren't his fault. Tund threw himself into his new role at Medicare Nigeria. His cybersecurity expertise, combined with his street-smart understanding of how systems could be manipulated, made him invaluable. He implemented security protocols that protected not just company data, but employee safety. The Tun Adeyemi Justice Fund became one of Nigeria's most effective legal aid organizations, helping dozens of wrongly accused people and taking on powerful interests that others fear to challenge. But perhaps most importantly, Tun found a family again. He became a fixture in the Okeke household, not a servant, but a trusted friend and guardian. He taught young Amara about computers and technology, just as he would have taught his own daughter. He helped Chioma navigate the complex world of pharmaceutical business, using his analytical skills to spot potential threats. And slowly, painfully, he began to heal. One evening, a year after his courtroom intervention, Tun sat in the compound of the Maitama mansion, the same spot where he used to watch from the abandoned building. But now he sat in a comfortable chair, drinking fresh juice, watching young Amara play with her new puppy. Chioma joined him, sitting in the chair beside his. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come forward? She asked quietly. Every day, Tund admitted. I think about how close I came to staying silent, how fear almost won. What made you finally decide to speak up? Tund was quiet for a moment, watching Amara chase the puppy around the garden. So full of life, so innocent. I realized that my wife and daughter didn't die, so I could spend the rest of my life hiding, he finally said. They died because evil people thought they could silence truth with violence. If I let that same evil win again, then their deaths meant nothing. He turned to Chioma. I couldn't save my family, but maybe I could save yours. Chioma reached over and squeezed his hand. You did more than save us, Tund. You reminded Nigeria that justice still matters. That one voice speaking truth can be more powerful than all the money and connections in the world. The story of the homeless man who saved a billionaire CEO became legendary in Nigeria. It was taught in law schools as an example of why the justice system must never rush to judgment. It was referenced by activists fighting against corruption and abuse of power. But for Tund Adeyemi, the real victory wasn't the fame or the comfortable life he'd rebuilt. It was a moment, 6 months later, when young Amara brought home a school project, a drawing of her family. In the picture, carefully rendered in crayon, were 3 figures, Amara herself, her mother Chioma, and a tall man with a kind face labeled Uncle Tund, my hero. Tund kept that drawing in his office at Medicare Nigeria, where it reminded him every day that even from the deepest darkness, even from the most devastating loss, it was possible to build something good again. Justice had been served. A family had been saved. And a homeless man who had lost everything found that he still had the most important thing of all, the courage to do what was right. Wow, what an incredible journey from homelessness to hero. This story proves that one person with courage can change everything. If this inspired you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with everyone you know. Drop a comment telling us what part of the story touched you the most. And remember, you never know who might be watching, who might need someone to stand up for them. Be that person. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next amazing story.